Renaissance literature refers to European literature which was influenced by the intellectual and cultural style associated with the Renaissance. The Renaissance itself began in Italy around the 13th century, though it is impossible to draw a clear dividing line between the medieval and the Renaissance worlds. The earliest Renaissance literature appeared in Italy in the 14th century by authors such as Dante, Petrarch, Boccaccio, Machiavelli, and Ariosto. In the 16th century, the Renaissance reached Britain. Trade, exploration, and the discoveries of new continents and the art of printing opened Britain's eyes to the rest of the world. The word Renaissance is French for rebirth. It addresses the classical Greek and Roman thought and art that were reborn or rediscovered. These very ideas and ideals were the very key in the critique of the Church's power. The literature is characterized by the adaptation of a humanist philosophy, humanism being a cultural current that emerged during the Renaissance that put individuals in the center, where man's life is emphasized. The individuals had previously only been a small part of the bigger picture, where community, God, and the church used to be more important. In the medieval times, the literature was religious. There were more morality plays and mystery plays that were teaching lessons that the church wanted people to know. But when we get into the Renaissance, the plays were more entertainment based.
Shakespeare. Shakespeare is probably seen as the greatest writer in the English language. He is often called England's national poet. However, one of his most greatest plays he ever wrote is Hamlet. You probably have heard about it, but why and how is this play connected to the Renaissance? If you take a look at this extract, it will be easier to understand my explanation. Hamlet is basically thinking of committing suicide on and off. He compares death to a little sleep, which he thinks isn't so bad. But the only catch is the dreams we might have when dead. Bad dreams. But of course we could escape a lot of things by being dead. For example, the pain of being in love, as Hamlet explains it, is like being hit with thousands of arrows. But it isn't only love that is affecting him. He also feels betrayed by his mom because she married so soon after his father's death, and to his dad's murderer, of course. We don't need to go through everything, but Hamlet may talk about suicide and how he feels, but what he's really concerned with is mortality and the fact that our world is made of death. Hamlet is seriously considering those big questions about life and death and the meaning of living. He may talk about whether or not to kill himself, or is he actually exploring the reasons why people in general don't commit suicide, because we're all gonna die either way. Sounds crazy, but if you check the extract you can see that he never uses the word I or me. So he is thinking more generally of life itself, and that's why the question is, to be or not to be. But how is this connected to the Renaissance? Shakespeare focused a lot on Hamlet as an individual and his philosophical thinking. Philosophy was very common during the Renaissance because much things changed and much things were discovered. People were confused and started to think more by themselves and questioning things. We can see this in Hamlet, in this extract, how Hamlet changes and becomes confused when his reality changes. You can see his insecurity and how he's questioning things. By summarizing, we can say that Hamlet is a lot about the human mind and a lot of human feelings. With other words, you can say that Shakespeare puts the human being in the center, and that's very common in the Renaissance literature, and that's the connection between them.
The play Romeo and Juliet is one of the most famous, if not the most famous, plays that Shakespeare has written. If, against all odds, some of you do not know about the play, it's a tragedy about two teens that fall in love but are from two feuding families that hate each other, making their love impossible. This scene contains some of the more recognizable and memorable passages in all of Shakespeare. In this famous balcony scene, Romeo and Juliet reveal their love to each other, and at Juliet's suggestion, they plan to marry.
Soft. What light through yonder window breaks? It is the east. Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon who's already sick and pale with grief. That thou, her maid, art far more fair than she. Be not her maid, since she is envious. Her vestal livery is but sick and green. A number of fools do wear it. Cast it off. It is my lady. Oh, it is my love. Oh, that she knew she were. She speaks, yet she says nothing. What of that? Her discourses, I will answer. Too bold. 'Tis not to me she speaks. Two of the fairest stars in all the heaven, having some business to entreat her eyes to twinkle in their sphere till they return. What if her eyes were there? They in her head? The brightness of her cheek would shame those stars, as daylight doth a lamp. Her eyes in heaven were through the airy region streamed so bright that birds would sing and think it were not night. See how she leans her cheek upon her hand. Oh, that I were a glove upon that hand. I might touch that cheek.
Renaissance characteristics. In this play, Shakespeare focuses on the lovers' struggle against public and social institutions that either explicitly or implicitly oppose the existence of their love. The enmity between their families, coupled with emphasis placed on loyalty and honor to kin, combine to create a profound conflict for Romeo and Juliet, who must rebel against their heritages. This symbolizes the Renaissance very well because, as previously mentioned, the Renaissance focused on breaking up much of the Dark Ages' social structure and put the individuals in the spotlight instead. Further, the play symbolizes the Renaissance by focusing on the two main characters' private desires rather than the actions demanded by social institutions. Romeo and Juliet's appreciation of night, with its darkness and privacy, and their renunciation of their names, with its attendant loss of obligation, makes sense in the context of individuals who wish to escape the public world, but lovers cannot stop the night from becoming day, and Romeo cannot cease to be a montage simply because he wants to. The rest of the world will not let him. This can be seen as Renaissance ideas infiltrating the medieval society, but change comes slowly. The lover's suicide can be understood as the ultimate night, the ultimate privacy, and the progress towards Renaissance ideas. In conclusion, this play's main Renaissance characteristic is that it challenges the Middle Ages social structure and targets the human being instead.
Yet another great writer of the Renaissance era was Christopher Marlowe. Marlowe was a talented man who met an early and untimely end in a pub brawl at the age of 29 in the year 1593. Marlowe occupied himself with poetry and writing plays. If not for his untimely death, he could have been a rival to Shakespeare. The writer Alfred Tennyson said himself that if Shakespeare is a dazzling son of this mighty period, Marlowe is certainly the morning star. The possible rivalry between Shakespeare and Marlowe is easily represented by their styles of writing. While Shakespeare wrote the way his audience spoke, Marlowe was educated at the University of Cambridge, which made his language more classical. They were two sides of the same coin. Marlowe wrote several literary works, but the one we will focus on is Dr. Faustus. Dr. Faustus revolves around the German scholar Dr. Faustus, who begins practicing magic out of frustration by the traditional forms of knowledge, such as medicine, religion, law, logic, etc. Faustus summons a demon by the name of Mephistopheles, who he bids to deliver a message to Lucifer, the devil. Faustus offers his soul in exchange for 24 years of Mephistopheles' service. Lucifer accepts Faustus' offer, and ultimately Faustus sells his soul. Mephistopheles answers all of Faustus' questions about the world, gives him with riches and a book of spells to study. There is but one question that is not answered: who created the universe? Faustus wastes his newfound magical abilities on pranks and tricks. For example, his first magical act after his deal with the devil is to become invisible and pull pranks at the Pope's court. At the end of his 24 years, Faustus is overcome by dread, and at midnight his soul is taken to hell, and even though he cries out in his last moments for God's redemption, no salvation comes. The only thing of his which remains is his dismembered corpse. Marlowe's work hold many traits of the Renaissance era. Dr. Faustus, in true Renaissance fashion, rejects religion, authorities, traditions, and God himself in favor of knowledge, power, wealth, and for a short time, ultimate freedom. Even though he is given numerous opportunities to repent during the course of the story, he rejects them all. When Faustus, in his final moments, begs for redemption, the play pulls off its last trait of the Renaissance era. The traditional Christian view, where anyone and all foul acts can be forgiven, is broken. There is no forgiveness for Faustus when the devil comes to collect his due. Some sins cannot be forgiven.
Andrew Marvell, to his coy mistress. Andrew Marvell, a later metaphysical poet born in 1621, wrote a poem of the passing of time. To his coy mistress is an extremely famous so-called Carpe Diem poem. Carpe Diem, which as often knows, means to capture the day. In the poem, the speaker urges his lover to do just that, to seize the day as tomorrow might never come, also using thoughtful arguments to seduce the lover. The speaker and the lover in the poem are particularly anonymous. They are nameless without many details about themselves. In the first stanza, the speaker tells the mistress that if they had more space and time, the coyness would be no crime. Coyness could be translated to shyness, someone who is reserved, quiet, and so on. The title can therefore be read as something similar to his shy mistress or to his quiet, reserved mistress. A mistress can have several meanings. In Marvel's time, a mistress could be a person who acted like a guardian, a patron, or a sponsor for artists. The poem can be analyzed to concern the subject of sex. So, if maybe the lady is the speaker's patron or guardian, it might be that he wants a sexual relationship with her, or maybe he's using sex as a metaphor for money and trying to convince her to sponsor a new project or to give him money in some way. It might just be both of those thoughts. Mistress is also a feminine form of the word master, and can therefore give a feeling of the mistress in the poem being in some kind of power position, which strengthens the mistress being the speaker's sponsor and or guardian. The speaker, as said, means that if they had the time, her shyness will be no crime, which can mean that he's saying that they don't have the time to wait with sex because they don't have the time. He describes how much he would compliment and admire her if there was time, and talks about her long preserved virginity, In the second stanza, he says, "But we don't have the time. Life is short, but death is forever." He warns her that when she dies, Warren will try to take her virginity if she doesn't have sex with him before she dies. In the third stanza, he tells her that now I have told you about the situation and what will happen when she dies. So it's pretty much let's have sex while we are still young. He finishes with talking about how they can't stop the sun. The sun rotating around the earth, which they thought at this time was in Marvel's time how time was created. But he means that when they are having sex, they are pursuing the time and they are not letting the time pursue them. That's some interesting thoughts about time and sex and death, and I think that this poem gives us a chance to explore those thoughts.